Hello and welcome to This Is Your Life Path, a podcast where I sit down with tabletop game designers and we have a chat about all of the things that have influenced and inspired them away from the tabletop world. I'm your host Kayla, I'm a game designer myself and I publish as Ratwave Gamehouse. I do games all about connection and alienation. At the start of the year, I released The Man We Knew, a noirish thriller for Orbital Blues about an old friend, sudden death, and a dangerous racket, which you can find at ratwavegamehouse.itch.io. Now to jump into the episode and introduce today's guest. My guest on this episode is the co-creator of Orbital Blues, the creator of Best Left Buried and the upcoming Inevitable, my wonderful mate, Zach Cox. Hello.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Kayla. It's good to be here.
Yes. How are you doing today? Do you want to introduce yourself anymore, or are you all satisfied?
I mean, you've pretty much done all of the stuff. I run a company called SoulMuppet Publishing and also do a lot of work with Rook and Decard, as well as being a games designer. I mainly do a lot of project and product management, which is turning things from games into books and making sure that people can enjoy the books and buy the books, no matter which continent they are on and what's happening with them. So yeah, it's games maker is broadly, but yeah, hoping to games design has been a big passion of mine going back a very long time. So yeah.
That's wonderful, and we're gonna learn more about that on the podcast. I don't know why I said that like I was throwing to, I don't know, the one show segment. I'm trying to figure out my podcasting voice. So first question to start off, where did you grow up?
So I'm British. I grew up in Nottingham in the East Midlands in England. So yeah, I mean, that's where I grew up. That's what I was doing. I'm like 26. Will be 27 next week. I feel like a child saying that. Oh, I'm 7 3/4. But yeah,
It's 26
kind of
until you're 27.
Grew up in Nottingham in the 2000s mostly.
Yes.
So that means wargaming. So a lot of Warhammer in my childhood and exposure to fantasy through lots of reading at the local library and lots of little plastic men that cost my parents lots of money. And now in my adulthood have cost me lots of money as well. So
do you still? Yeah. What's the oldest little plastic man you own?
Oh God! So I have a bunch of. So the oldest thing I have owned consistently is probably like a Space Marine from 2005, I'd guess. I've got a guy I won a painting competition at 10 years old. Is like up in my attic somewhere. I did give them away to a friend for about 5 years, but managed to get them back. My entire childhood Space Marine army was returned to me for the princely sum of buying the man a curry. So it was I managed to wrangle that. But the oldest model I've probably got some from the 90s, some old Plague Marines, because I like having funky little retro dudes amongst the modern tall ones. You know,
that makes
some
sense.
short kings in my Space Marine army. You know.
Yes, so true.
But, yeah.
So you were into like fantasy and gaming from like quite a young age. How did you first get into it?
Well, my first experience in role-playing games happened about 10 years before I actually played my first actual real game. I think I was in Waterstones. I was probably about 11 or 12, and I saw a copy of Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing 2nd Edition, which is excellent. It's I might get in trouble with this. I think it's the best of the Warhammer editions.
Okay.
First one's a bit mad. It doesn't age very well. The grogs would shout at me for this, but yeah. So I was trying to play a Warhammer Fantasy role-playing campaign with my brother and maybe one other friend, with no understanding of the culture or texture of role-playing games or what they were, because I wasn't part of a club. I'd never played a game before I started trying to run one, and like
You're self-taught off the book.
Self-taught. YouTube wasn't a thing, right? You couldn't watch Critical Role to work out how Matt Mercer does it, or whichever person you're drawing influence from in that kind of scene. So, and I wasn't on the internet either, because in 2005 I didn't have a phone. No one had a smartphone, I think.
No.
So I was playing that I probably tried to play it for a couple of years, like on my lunch break at the school Warhammer. I was like, this is also Warhammer. We can play rat catchers, and like trying to get them to play that instead of Combat Patrol, the people I was hanging out with. And then like probably about 10 years after that, when I was at uni, I sort of played 5th edition, and then spiraled out of that, first through the like old school Dungeoneering Google Plus blog scene, and then slowly becoming more story game pilled as I have like advanced in my career. Not that I don't love all that Dungeoneering stuff. I just think that like there's people who are doing that work a lot more interesting than me now. My first game, Best Left Buried, which is very much a smushing together of old school Dungeoneering sensibilities with story game-esque macro economy. These things happen to you as you go Dungeoneering, and it delivers a sort of a piece about workers' rights and mental health in the workplace by making Dungeoneering something that you do for a job. Even the first thing I made was very influenced by stuff like Fate, by stuff like Blades in the Dark, which I think was just releasing around the time I was playing Best Left Buried, and like story games of that vein. And then I've slowly gotten sadder and more cowboy orientated as the years have passed.
Yeah, the depression comes on with the cowboy aesthetic.
Yeah, give or take. I mean, it's fair to say that the characters in Best Left Buried are pretty depressed.
Yes.
But all my games are about mental health, basically, when you start like looking back and examining subtext. But, that's a whole other interview question to where did you grow up?
No, that's fine. It's going to bounce around. That's cool. So when you were introduced to like 5e and stuff in uni, where did that come? Was that from like societies or friends or stuff?
Well, the exact thing that happened was that I moved into my flat in second year, and we didn't have any Wi-Fi for 2 weeks because I didn't understand, as a person who'd only ever lived with my parents or in halls, that like the Wi-Fi didn't just turn on the moment you plugged a box into the wall. So in that 2 weeks, I played a lot of Super Smash Brothers on my best friend's GameCube or whatever it would have been, and then around that I bought the big 3-book set, and then like the people I was living with, we didn't have anything to do, right? It was either we didn't have any money, so we couldn't go drinking. So what ended up happening is that I think I bought the 3-box set, found a map on the internet. I was probably running a Dyson Delve or something. I wouldn't have been that cultured. It would have been Lost Mines of Phandelver or something. And then I ran D&D 10 times in 2 weeks because we didn't have anything to do, right? So that I've never played. It was like we did a big campaign in like 2 weeks basically, because I had nothing to do apart from prepare sessions, and my friends were like, well, let's play again then, because we don't have anything better to do. So
yeah, if you're all stuck without the Wi-Fi.
We're stuck without the Wi-Fi, and then obviously the Wi-Fi then arrived, and we played 3 games over the course of that next year because we could look at the internet now.
Yeah.
So it was, but yeah, I played that, and then through the sort of University of York Gaming Society, which is where I went to uni, I think I ended up playing a couple different games over that year. Played a fair bit of Fate, which I don't recommend to anyone. It's interesting, but just I think genre agnostic games are. Well, it's like a sort of it claims to do the thing where, like, in a sort of Joseph Campbell sense, it breaks down the concept of stories into aspects and high concepts and some other thing, and like they think they've solved all genres but like I think genreless gaming is not having a genre is just like the act of cowardice, because like trying to do it for anything means it can be done. It can actually do nothing, right? So the games that I make are always like delivering the absolute knife of a genre and an experience, because like they're sculpted to do a thing, and if the game isn't doing that thing, you should be playing a different game, right?
Yeah,
get that, like,
it like there's a core like thrust of what your games are doing that is tied into genre and setting and everything there. That when you have games that aren't that, it just feels hard for me to often like visualize that without
and like else. Sometimes you had an idea or a theme so specific that there isn't a game for it, right? And in that case, maybe it's worth running something agnostic. But like, I think with the wealth of games available today, having a universal role playing game is a waste of paper, because if it's it's trying to so I played a lot through I was doing an economics degree at York. And I was playing, which is completely useless to my actual field. If you told any of my school English teachers that I was now a professional publisher, I ran a publishing company, I'd written a dozen books. Well, a dozen. I had written many books. They would be quite surprised that was the case, because I think I thought Shakespeare was quite boring, and I wasn't, So that meant that. I bounced off Mice and Men, which means I must have hated literature.
So you weren't like a particularly like bookish or academically?
Well, no, I read a lot. I was consuming voracious quantities of like fantasy novels between the ages of, like 7 and 16. I don't read much anymore because I'm working all the goddamn time, and I'm thinking about games and I'm writing. But I think there have been. I was also probably riddled with so much neurodiversity that I think there would have been weeks in my teenage and preteen years where I had read more books than Zachary Cox, have in the last 5 years. Right?
Yeah.
I was chewing stuff off the shelf, and my teachers at the time would have been like, "Stop consuming this rubbish genre fiction and try to like." Actually read something of cultural value. Like, I had an English teacher who was like, you need to stop reading Terry Pratchett, but the nearest thing that's sensible you should read is like Jeeves and Wooster, right? Read some Woodhouse. You'll be, to be fair, those are great books. I enjoyed them. It was a good recommendation, but there were no wizards in it, so it didn't really hold my attention for very long.
Snobbish, setting and thing to be delivering as a teacher.
I was at a very posh private school, so that if you can't tell from the way I talk, I sound like I was in North England. It was a very fancy private school. And,
I see that slots in.
Yeah, I mean, there was a huge, beautiful library with a very large section of walls and walls and walls of young adult fantasy, because the librarians didn't care; they just wanted you to read. But the English teachers were very much like, this is not Lord Byron, or poetry. You should be reading poetry instead of fantasy novels. But and then I didn't pursue it because I didn't pursue any type of writing because maths felt easier, and I have no idea 10 years later how I held that opinion at the time.
Speaking of being riddled with neurodiversity and reading, I remember like on more than one occasion.
Yeah.
When I was an active reader as a kid as well, like in a similar way, being like given a book by a teacher, be like, you should read this. It's about a kid who doesn't fit in and is really sad about it. And I'm like, I feel like this is a message. Why am I being given this message?
I feel like to use some Merengueism quote about subtext there, but
So I guess talking about like fantasy and the reading you did, what kind of books sort of what kind of like, I guess, fiction or other medium stuff, say, if we were to go in order, like first and foremost, like Best Left Buried, and then we could go out from there.
Well, Best Left Buried is honestly, there's not really that much media in there because it's all about dungeoneering, right? That game is a. So, for those who haven't played Best Left Buried, you play or have read it at all. Playing it is, of course, optional. You play adventurers who are professional adventurers called crypt diggers, and you work for a crypt digging company that digs into ruins of dungeons and looks for treasure that are then taken back to the bank and then sold, right? So you're basically professional adventurers, and what happens is that dungeoneering is really horrible. It's a game about how awful dungeoneering would be if you did it in real life. It is cold, it is wet, it is dark. You can see tiny little glinting goblin eyes at the end of the dungeon, and it does bad things to people because workplace stress and horrible injury doesn't make people feel happy. So it's kind of got an opt-in sanity mechanic in inverted commas, because I think that they've got a really bad rap in a lot of games for being very ableist, and that is something that was very important to me as a person suffering from like actual real life mental health issues and aware of disability in the world. And it's about, you basically have health and then health and grip, which represents a mixture of stamina, sanity, and mana, and that is used for rerolls, casting spells, and also like degraded by monsters and stuff attacking it or appearing, or just stuff that scares the shit out of you. And when you run out of that stat as you get towards hitting 0, because if you run out of grip, you die, you join the monsters, you have a heart attack, you panic, you give up, you go home, you're removed from the game. The only way to get it back isn't by resting, it's by accepting afflictions or injuries, which are things that you role play about your character. You can either roll one or choose one, and it kind of adds a fun role-playing, a fun sort of kooky, dark comedy role-playing element to being in your dungeon and not being very good for your people who have been chewed up and spat out by essentially capitalists. And the idea being that you're choosing it, you're opting into it. This is what happens to people who have to work in these kind of scenarios. They don't do well. It's horrible. I didn't realize I was writing a very politically themed game at the time. I was trying to write a horror dungeon crawler, right? And it is a horror dungeon crawler. But specifically, the thing I didn't like about playing old school games was that I was dying all the time, and I liked my characters, and it was annoying when they died very immediately. So, despite the fact Best Left Buried is a horror game, is actually really quite difficult to die compared to a lot of games of the genre. So the specific thing about it is that instead of your character dying, you get this huge pool of rerolls that you then have to earn up by having fun things you can roleplay about your character, or mechanical injuries and stuff. So rather than, that wasn't really about media at the time, it was more of a reaction to me wanting something different when I was playing these weekly old school games I was playing with my friends at the time, and getting really fucking annoyed when my first level character fell into a pit trap and then ate shit.
Yeah.
I liked that guy. They had a cool name, and I understand that in the culture, what you're meant to do is embrace joyfully, because making a character is the most fun part of the process, right? But the idea being that if you did die in Best Left Buried, it's so quick and interesting to make a new character that you don't feel too bad about it, but you kind of have this fun transition of these kooky, fresh-faced veterans coming straight out of the recruitment to ending up with this absolutely grizzled team of adventurers. So the main thing there is it's simultaneously a rejection and a love letter to that kind of old school gaming, where hoping people who didn't like it because of those reasons, right? High mortality, character attachment, the rules maybe it's also a little bit more complicated rules wise. You can sort of play it as there's a nice crunch to the combat that doesn't happen in a lot of games where you just roll a d20 and maybe do some damage to it after. So it's been quite popular because people have enjoyed that, and also my collaborator on it, Ben Brown, the artist, has done impeccably weird black and white monsters for it over the course of 5 years now, nearly, since we started working on it. So, they really captures people's imaginations. Yeah.
Yeah, the monsters and art for Best Left Buried is really awesome.
Yeah. No.
So I guess in that case, the influence is there, sort of a commentary on dungeon crawling. Would you use the word commentary?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, and that commentary inviting and bringing in a lot of aspects of sort of workplace and toxic work environments.
Yeah, I mean, like it's that toxic work environments, workplace, and also like colonialism being very bad, which is something that kind of gets shrugged over in a lot of like these goal for experience based dungeon crawling stuff. We're writing a book at the moment called Throne of Avarice, written by my good friend Brian Yaksher, who has basically written a big book about like the banks and the companies and these sort of instruments of capital and colonialism which send you into the adventuring world. Like, Brian is much smarter than me when it comes to writing themes. Like, I very much came up with all this stuff about what Best Left Buried was about and what it meant, like, very much appeared after I'd written it. And this happens quite a lot. I look at a game and go, wow, that is very deeply sad, and it's about how much I hate capitalism.
Yeah.
And that has happened.
How do you feel when you notice that?
We're coming up on the third time in a row now, Kayla, so I'm getting less surprised each time.
There's you again.
There's me. There's it. There's that. But there was a point in the development of Orbital Blues happened quite similarly in that. So I was pitched a space western version of Best Left Buried by my friend Sam Salini, who's Orbital Blues' creator. And he said we should hire this artist. He's my buddy. He's called Josh. He does all these amazing photo kit-bashed illustrations. And I want to make a Dust Bowl space western about being a sad space cowboy who is unemployed, is moving around the galaxy, trying to get work, making ends meet, and kind of, but also being cool. And that being also being cool, you know what I mean? Because like, there's something so effortlessly cool about the idea of the space cowboy. Like,
yeah.
I think it's borrowed from Cowboy Bebop, certainly, and I guess Firefly as well, although that's aged quite poorly, in my opinion, looking at how I feel about Joss Whedon in all the stuff flying around about him. And, I don't think that set was always handled very well, and it didn't last for very long. But anyway, and then The Mandalorian now is also like another fantastic space western. That is also about a very sad dad and his kid. The great stories of the noughties not the noughties. What do we call them? The teenies now?
Oh, the teenies is horrible. I've heard the new tens, but I've never heard anyone say it. I was listening to something where someone, instead of saying the noughties, said the ooze.
See, I'm a big fan of the ooze. I
love the idea that we grew up in the ooze.
The ooze.
I came of age during the ooze.
That's what the river in York is called, so it works. Wow. And also, I grew up mostly covered in ichor. So, 3 level. No, all these stories of the last decade about sad men with kids appearing a couple, or like kid-like figures, adopted children,
wards,
appearing wards, yes, and having a sad dad in a ward is very much what how inevitable the novel that's based on started. But once I'm talking about Orbital Blues, so Orbital Blues, Sam pitched me Orbital Blues, and then we wrote it, and it was actually a quite straight Best Left Buried adaptation. You kind of started playing and eventually developed these reasons that you were sad as you were playing, and then about 6 months into that, we'd done the first draft of the game, and it was good, but it was missing a little bit of source. And then in the process of rewriting a bunch of it, and Sam was writing this amazing adventure called the Sutler System, which was released as an Unchained Melody, which is the quick start we did. I was off doing a bunch of mechanical rewrites for the base game, And what we did was, well, what actually happened is that I played Disco Elysium and was having a terrible, it was in the fallout of a terrible breakup. And I was incredibly depressed. And have you played Disco Elysium, Kayla?
I've not played Disco Elysium.
Okay. So it's about, and for those of you at home, a incredibly sad cop who is an alcoholic and is trying to solve a murder in this sort of weird post-communist revolution neoliberal city called Martinez, Revachol. It's kind of French and Eastern. The creators of this amazing, I think they're Estonian, but it's sadly a bunch has gone wrong with that team now, and they've been bought by
Seen a bit about that, yeah.
It's faff. It's a beautiful game, and it's about a very depressed cop, and it's a CRPG, right? So it's got the it kind of works like Planescape Torment or Baldur's Gate or something like that, but there's no combat, and your skills are voices in your head that are talking to you as you play. So like you're rolling skill checks to see if the force of your encyclopedic knowledge can inform you about something that's going on. And you've got like 16 skills that are like, how much do you know? How good are you at convincing people things? What's your intuition? Can you do like Sherlock Holmes-esque visual calculus and work out that there's 7 people walking through this pile of mud here? And like, but they get increasingly more weird. So you're like, now the spirit of the city of Revachol will communicate you through like messages. And the other one is called Inland Empire, who's like your like intuition of the world and your voices speaking to you inside your head. Right. There's another one which is, because you're a cop, it's called L'Esprit de Corps. I don't speak French, that's terrible. But like it's your knowledge as a cop, like institutionalized in your head, speaking to you in the voices of your colleagues who are sort of implied to all be dead in action. Like, and it's, so you've got these like voices talking to you as you play, and like your role, depending on your stat distribution, you are like, your different parts of your brain are talking to you more. So like if you are a cop who is very strong and fast, your the forces of your body will talk to you more. Whereas if you're like a emotionally savvy or smart cop, you will get like more intuition emotionally, or like facts appearing, or like information about the screen, and like so you're everything down the right. You're basically your brain's talking to you. Right?
That's a really fascinating way of like showing a different emphasis of character.
Oh yeah, it's completely mad. But the thing about it that really influenced Orbital Blues specifically was this thing, or at least like the very small part that I had to play in the Orbital Blues mechanical engine, is this thing called the Thought Cabinet, which is essentially a inventory for what you are thinking about, right? So you have an increasing number of slots as the game increases that you get by leveling up. And you basically have a question or an idea that you are thinking about, and that like occurs to you as you are exploring the world. So you can say, ooh, I wonder how old I am. Or like, is communism a good idea? Or like, why am I here? All these questions, right? And you can choose to think about them by placing them in your thought cabinet. And then you move around the world, and as time passes and you are thinking about it, you eventually finish that entry in the thought cabinet, and you are awarded with a mechanical bonus for having thought about this thing and understood it. And what you can do is then either, and there are also bonuses while you are doing a certain thing. So if you're thinking about your body and how old you are, you will get a bonus to your physical dexterity, right, while you are doing that. And then at the end, you get the ability to have like something appears better, or you get a little buff, and you either go, I will continue this and remember it and keep it in your thought cabinet, or you throw it out and start thinking about a new thing.
Right.
So essentially, it's an absolutely brilliant piece of games design that I was like, this is about a guy who is brooding incredibly sadly about a number of quite specific things. And essentially the troubles system for Orbital Blues, which is like a sort of a mixture of XP prompts, backstory generators, and character and history accumulate contact generation, and also like role-playing prompts that give you experience. If you will, but it's called Blues, but it is affecting an experience, and then you gather your points by role-playing in line with this character or inventing backstory, because like the trouble is the thing that you are sad about, right? And then when you get to a certain point, you can then say, okay, my trouble's now brewing. That's what we call troubles brewing. And you can enter as you have to have an emotionally charged action or conversation with a crewmate or a rival or just a combat, right? Where you are incredibly sad and music plays while you are doing something. And then when that happens and you've finished your you finish that scene, you level up, right? But not before you have to spend like 2 or 3 days just being mad fucking zonked out depressed, right?
Yeah.
And that was like, that specific bit of mechanics was like me basically working out how to write a less context specific version of the thought cabinet from Disco Elysium. Because like you couldn't write those because they're like very keyed to being that specific character. So it has to be like, here are the things that you are sad about. And what I'm trying to work out at the moment in time for Orbital 2s, which is the joke name for the next Orbital Blues project coming this year.
Are you worried you need to get off the joke name quickly, otherwise it's going to stick?
I have such a problem. I've only once have I ever managed to change a project after I first thought of the name for it. Inevitable used to be called Myth. And then fucking Chris McDowell, that bastard, released a game called Mythic Bastionland, which is also about being knights and seers on a quest. And I was like, that won't stand. We're friends. I have to go to the pub with him. I don't want to kill him, so he doesn't make his role-playing game. So I had to change that. But yeah, no, Orbital 2s will have an actual serious name. It will be, you know. But what I'm trying to work out is, how can I give a spaceship a trouble?
Oh.
And then once I work that out, we're cooking with gas.
Yeah.
But in the meanwhile, I'm just sat here madly trying to consume as many PBTA texts as well, just sticking my face in Wonder Home until tokens fall out my ass. You know, we'll work it out. But,
yeah. I really feel when I've played Orbital Blues, like, picking troubles is where I discover, like, what is, like, almost like a course sort of, like, anchor or codex for my character and how I end up playing them.
The only thing I'd change if we did Orbital Blues again is you currently start by coming up with a name and a sort of tag, like a call sign. There's this wonderful spread in the book of like, you could be the mechanic or the loser or the smoker or the hick. And I'm like, if I was starting again, that would be the thing you pick after choosing a trouble. Like, the most important thing should be the reason that you have depression. And it's not always depression, but like, you know, that's absolutely right. It's
the blues.
The blues, right. The blues as a sort of mythical, monolithic concept. And, you know, that's what we're doing there. And also, the other thing about Orbital Blues is that I really needed to work out how to... There was a big currency thing where we got rid of all the money and replaced it with the fact that you will always be poor, like mechanically enforced poorness, because that's another big part of the politics of it, right? In that the gig economy is set by the structures of capitalism to want to destroy you and want you to be a sort of agent in there, and by being these kind of like freelance itinerant workers, while you are like rejecting the tenets of capitalism entirely, and that you're trying to move around and not have a job and not work for a corp, it's inevitable, right? You know, you still can't fix it because all these structures around you are, and that was, you know, it was clearer to us at that point that it was a game about, like, I think it was always a game about poverty and depression, but like, it was important to me that, well, this, like, this is where the old school method of this, the Thinking Adventures way, would be making the themes of the setting about poverty and depression, right? Which is how we started. But what actually we ended up doing was making the engine of the game make those things something that would be certain by having the designer of the game, me, sit at your table and tell you how the rules work. Or co-designer rather. But yeah, Sam did a lot of the narrative work. Josh obviously crafted this amazing, beautiful world that's full of like fake posters and like in-universe adverts and
It's
logos
so stylish.
that don't exist. Oh, it's slick. It's so slick. I'm very happy to work with Josh again and again and again on whatever books he'll agree to make with me.
But yeah, like the mechanics and rules of things like the blues and like the economy, I guess, like all go and enforce the themes on there.
Those things being inescapable, being baked into the mechanics, is a very important part of the world, right? We're trying to tell a story about a certain thing and railroading your ability to escape from that within almost within the unexceptional realm of play. As long as you are on a spaceship and you have not, and you want to look after your people and provide, you're never going to be rich because that's something that the other people do, and they are willing to. The people who have accumulated capital are willing to commit greater violence than you are, almost certainly. And if not, then that's the reason you should have the fucking blues. Well, okay.
So moving on to Inevitable. Inevitable is SoulMuppet's upcoming game. Are you going to crowdfunding some point this year?
Yeah, hopefully April/May Kickstarter. It's all about I want to make sure. I like to try and make sure that people get the game I've previously finished crowdfunding before I start selling them the next one. Because that's good practice. So basically, it's nearly done. It's like as soon as I can get it to people, it will be coming, and it is. So the situation for this one is that I started writing Inevitable 6 years ago now. I had the last big fantasy book series I read, and I will never probably read another one, was The Dark Tower by Stephen King, which is it's basically Lord of the Rings by way of spaghetti western. It concerns the work of Roland of Gilead, who is the gunslinger son of the line of Eld, which is like King Arthur's great grandson, Roland de Cheyne, is like wandering around his post-apocalyptic universe as the whole thing is collapsing in upon itself. And there's like two very classic westerns book series that are like kind of a little bit kooky, and then 5 remaining completely insane, like planes hopping. He goes to New York and like meets all these humans, not humans, like people from Earth, and then they go to his fantasy world, and then Stephen King meets himself in book 6, and it's completely mad. But yeah, it completely goes off the wall at the end, but it's still beautiful. But what caught my imagination was the idea of this incredibly wounded man who everyone he knows and loves has died, wandering around the desert with this kid called Jake, who's like his little squire, his sidekick. And there's more characters throughout the novel, but the first book, The Gunslinger, was about this kid and this old man wandering. Well, he's not even that. He's implied to be centuries old, but this magical gun-toting knight cowboy wandering the world. And I wrote, as I was writing it, I was like, I tried to pitch a game of it, a role-playing game of this that was like Stephen King Dark Tower-esque to my 5e group, as like, we'll play some low magic 5e with some gunslinging knights, and we'll go on a quest to try get to heaven at the end of the desert. And they instead decided to play a like ultra modern 5e thing about being a Twitch streamer who was a cyberpunk assassin. And I'm very annoyed that I put that pitch in there. I did the thing I do too often, where I offer to my friends, and you've been subject to this,
Have I?
a series of things to vote for that I could run, while actually only wanting to run one of them. You know,
Oh, right,
like,
yes.
this is what I want, but which game do you guys want to play? So Inevitable, or Knee Myth, Knee the Last Errant was scorned and rejected by my friends in favour of Twitch streaming assassins. It was a great one shot. They like went through a dance floor and killed someone in a club, and it was with SMG. Very, very, very good, but not the thing I would spend the next 6 years of my life writing. So I was so angry they wouldn't play my role-playing game that I wrote a novel. No one had to participate in my novel, apart from all my beta readers, which, God bless them, they did their best. And it was about a knight and his squire, a kid who becomes a squire in the same way that it does in Roland's game, about walking through this desert full of wizard cowboys and being very sad. And the big thing about Inevitable and about the world of myth and the Baron, which is the setting, is that prophecy is immutable, right? There's nothing you can do to prevent a prophecy from happening. So I wrote a novel about this character who knows how he's going to die and has done for a very long time. And in the same way that it does in The Dark Tower, his civilization has been destroyed. He is the last remnant of everyone he's ever known. But he's been told he's not going to die for another 15 years. So he's like wandering around trying to get himself killed, doing suicidal heroics. But it's just not working because, he's been foretold, he's not going to die. And he meets all these other characters, and it's basically about all these people and their relationships with knowing their death, right? And these people accepting it in lots of different ways, which is a great pitch for a novel. But what I then tried to do is that I thought that I was writing a 3-book series, right? So I've got the first novel on ice that took me a full year to write when I was doing nothing else creatively. And I've got to finish it because, I'm never going to finish it because not only are they so large, but also like I've let it. So there's a third act cliffhanger. If I release it now and didn't finish, like with no intention of finishing it, because it would take me 2 more years to finish trilogy if I did no other creative work. There's the fans would be furious, and it's terrifying. They'd be lynched at this. I mean, that sounds really pretentious, but like there would be like 4 people on my Discord server who'd really hate me. So I'd rather keep them as pals and customers and friends. So
yeah, it makes sense.
But so what I ended up doing is going, well, this world is amazing. I've written some really potent themes. How do I turn it into a role-playing game? And there was also a point where I realised I was writing very tight Stephen King fan fiction. But when I was reading Wizard and Glass, which is the 4th book in the Dark Tower, the one that I think is the best, and I flipped to the next page, and they were in a saloon called the Traveller's Rest, and I was writing a scene in my novel at that point set in a pub called the Traveller's Rest. Right?
Oh my god!
I've started predicting, prophesying.
Too deep in the source.
I'm too deep in the source. So I took a bit of a break and then wrote something a bit more original after that. But it's like still the dialogue was a bit rubbish. I'm not a great novelist. I'm a much better RPG writer. So what I tried to do was work out, well, how can I write a role-playing game about this setting? Because I think it's fantastic, and I love very sad cowboys, and I have done for some time. And writing a role-playing game with the same theme as The Last Errant would have been exceptionally difficult because it's about death and about your character dying in a certain place, and like these characters knowing what's going to happen to them, which is very difficult because like people don't like being told what's going to happen in their role-playing game, right? And that's been the issue with trying to write it. So I spent a while noodling around with it. I wrote a bunch of systems, and I realised that what I need to do is that I've moved the setting of the game quite early in the midway through the writing process from being about traveling this ruined world where the civilization has been destroyed and you are sort of in the remnants of it to it being the last pre-apocalyptic moments of your great civilization, and the thing that we know is going to be destroyed is not your character, it is myth, your kingdom. Everybody you know and love will die, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so in the game you play knights and wizards and priests and cowboys in service of the king of myth, this civilization, and you are attempting to run around and stop it from being destroyed in a without. And it's all about, like, can you save this world? You probably can't. So it's actually about the story that you're going to tell of this destruction, right? And how you, specifically as heroes of this great land, will be remembered, right? It's about telling whatever the opposite of a creation myth is, right? Because it's more easy to say what's going to happen in a campaign, which is that we're going to fail to stop this city from being destroyed, than to tell your characters how they're going to die, right? Because you have agency, the setting does not, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be very, very sad because it's about death and destruction and the end of things, but there's also a moment that you get to choose the manner of your demise in a way that is hopefully going to be a beautiful story that we can tell for all of these players. And also you get to play cowboys with magic guns, and it's very cool.
I was in a playtest for Inevitable, and I can confirm it is very sad. It is very cool, and about, like, I guess I'll say 2.5 characters died because my character died, but my heart was buried in a box somewhere.
Yeah, your heart was cast in amber, which means that you were eventually going to wake up at the end of the campaign.
Yeah. 2 characters died, but all those moments of death were hugely dramatic and hugely satisfying, and also all felt so informed by all of those characters from the moment we'd met and created them. They had an awareness that they were in the dying days of a civilization.
So, oh god. So Darian obviously died fighting Sir Levere. Who else?
Radensgard died at the end.
Radensgard died at the end.
Yeah.
And also, we need to remember that Vasily the Lead Drake also died.
Oh, yes. So 3.5.
With a mech. That was a good one.
Gunfight with a mech, if that, like, as a cowboy knight, that doesn't sell you on a game.
Yeah. No, it's a big old vibes fest, right? And that's important with a lot of the games, is that there's this big, beautiful, like, Arthurian setting of this civilization, and but none of it actually matters, because the important thing is that you're playing cowboys, and the cowboys have magic guns, and many of them are wizards and or knights, and, like, you're going to be engaged in this, like, chivalric sword fights and sort of big, ridiculous, quixotic quests. And I've gone back through since we played it and added a bunch of, like, really weird legendarium subtext. Like, it's now in the game that possibly if you find Excalibur, you can become King of Myth, and it won't matter that the king dies.
That is cool.
It's all in there now. I love the idea of a group of knights being like, hey, this king's going to die in the prophecy, but if we go find the Lady of the Lake and one of us is worthy, like, so it's
go rogue I was going to say Grail quest, but more sword quest.
Well, there's a Grail quest in there as well, don't worry.
Of course.
Yeah. There's multiple Grail quests, and you can also find some magic rings, because I'm a menace. Can't be trusted with cowboys. But yeah, there's a lot of impeccable vibes, I hope, that and also the art that's done by the fantastic Claire_arts on Twitter and Instagram as well, that are truly impeccable.
Yeah, you've posted
excited
some of the
to
art
get
on your
my hands
Twitter,
on.
and it's really amazing.
Oh, yeah, I mean, lots and lots. There's like going to be over 100 pieces in the final book, all of which are in like. It's going to be the first thing SoulMuppet does in A4, with like a big hard cover, and it's got the lady in the lake on the front with a handgun, and the thing is that the most wonderful thing about working with incredible artists and running this company is that, as much as it is like slightly scary not really having a guaranteed income and having to do all this creative work, otherwise I will be homeless, is that I get to give artists money, and what comes out is beautiful books that people will use and run and play, and I get to like indulge in my whimsical fantasies of like having all this beautiful art appear of stuff that previously existed in my head for a really long time. Because like this has been the only book I've not written a book since. Like, I've not done a book by myself with my vision since I started SoulMuppet in probably 2019.
Oh,
So like I've been doing games part time, like 20 plus hours a week for 4 years now, basically, since I last made a book that was written by me from an idea I had. Because most of the sort of best Left Brain adventures, Orbital Blues was a massive collaborative effort, and so was Gangs of Titan City. Our friend Nick has been very fantastic breaking that, and all the projects that I've been doing have mainly been like, I've not been the primary creator. I've been a sort of consultant writer, like occasionally doing some of that, but mostly looking at like art direction and project management and logistics and marketing and making the things appear, the stuff I talked about at the beginning, right? But this is, and the reason I'm so excited about it is that like this is my fucking baby, and it is going to slap. Like
it
it's going to be
slaps.
huge, I hope. And we've revealed our ages there, talking about slapping. God, but yeah, no, it's good. It's fantastic, and I'm so excited, and I just can't wait to get it into people's hands. And I'm just doomed Arthurian Western. Just pump it into my veins. So many
It's
sad cowboys.
sick.
Like, yeah, no.
With art, talking about art and commissioning art, am I correct in saying for Inevitable, because you were working on the playlists, like you're often receiving art while working on the game itself?
It depends on the project. I've been well. The start date on the manuscript for Inevitable was like March 2021. So I've been working on it for 2 years, and I hired Claire, I think, about 3 to 6 months after that. So I've been working on it for nearly 3 years. No, for 2 years now. But that's the manuscript. The actual, I wrote the novel in 2017. So like, there's been a lot of this stuff in my head for a really long time, and the art's been streaming in at 2 or 3 pieces a month for some months for nearly 2 years now as well, like a year and a half. So it's been very gratifying sending her the pitches and getting this like wonderful, enthusiastic stuff that's previously only existed in my head. Especially because like it's like, because obviously I've been lucky enough to work with some fantastic artists over the years. I've done a lot of stuff with Ben, but when we're working on the original Best Left Buried book, I was just like, bring me a monster that looks like a goat, and like something would come back that was like more interesting than what I was capable of thinking of. And we did write like most of the art direction for Orbital Blues was done by Sam. Like I was supporting, but like Sam wrote all the pitches, Sam came up with all the ideas, and then Josh obviously did the final stuff. Well, to be fair, I think most of Josh's stuff was pretty unprompted and off the dome. I think there are a couple of pieces that we said, hey, we think we need this or that, but this has very much been like, I get to think of this idea, sit on a mountain for like a couple of years, noodling away at this manuscript, and then the art just comes streaming in as I'm working on it, and it makes me really, really happy because, like I said, this one's my baby. I've been thinking about it for a long time.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, Dev, what you were talking about with like the Best Left Buried collaboration with Ben is often do you feel like getting in new pieces of art sometimes influences, or like how does that influence and help you iterate on the ideas you may have started already?
I mean, so like most of the Best Left Buried dungeons that we do are not I pitch Ben a monster, and so like Ben's background is in like drawing. Is it actually political cartooning, which is absolutely ridiculous. But so before he was drawing unhinged dungeon dwelling monsters with veiny faces and horrible policies towards people, he was drawing Margaret Thatcher and whatnot, and pictures of the empowered British politicians at the time.
Very different world from Unhinged.
Oh yeah, totally.
Regard for people.
I think that was the joke I was trying to make, but I don't know. So Ben, that was a lot of what Ben was doing, and like Ben is so viscerally imaginative with monsters that like I don't tend to pitch him stuff. So like a lot of I don't have the audacity to tell him how to draw a monster because a lot of the early Best Left Buried dungeons were I was coming up with what the dungeon would be after Ben had sent me the monster. So
right.
So for example, the starter dungeon in Best Left Buried is called Lord Edmund's Barrow, right? And that's in the Dungeon Master's Guide equivalent, Doomsayer's Guide to Horror, and what happened is that I was sent a drawing of a moth bear, right? So a big, like it looks like an owl bear, like these big squat haunches, but then like 6 eyes and like little wings coming off it, and like it had silk coming out of it, right? So I was like, oh my god, how do I turn this into a dungeon? So what it turns into is like me drawing me deciding that this dungeon is going to be a burial site for mummies, where the owlbear is a captured creature that is being used to make silk wrapping, right?
Oh my god.
So then the entire like burial complex around it, which this owlbear has now escaped, well, this moth bear rather, Mother as she was called. He's also in the image got all these horrible little cocoon silk wrapped cubs that are like tiny little mouth bear, and it's like that stuff happens on a regular basis. We have the same process with the Octoclops in the first dungeon, which is like a sort of enormous cyclops with like 8 bug eyes, and then that whole run of initial dungeons was just like Ben would send me this absolutely jacked up insane monster, and I'd be like, how do I turn this into a dungeon? Because like one of the things for me is that like even in horror there should be a reason that this weird fucking thing's running around, right? Because it like information is really important in dungeon crawling, like being able to understand why a thing exists and where it lives and where it comes from. Like you can't, it's best if it's not just like, oh, so random, spoopy monster. So then I have to go, why does this horse-limbed, drooping Ichorsac creature live in this place, right? So I would say that although sometimes I'm like, hey, bud, draw me a snake with lots of teeth. Like that happens sometimes, but more often than not, it's like, a lot of the more interesting Best Left Buried monsters also come from collaborations, right? But equally, this is my favorite one, is that we did the first Kickstarter SoulMuppet ever did in 2019 or something. Was called A Doom to Speak, and it was these little pamphlet dungeons, like a zine, we called them, which is like one piece of paper with an adventure and everything you need to run a session. And we'd hired 5 stretch goal writers, and Ben had drawn 5 monsters. And basically, every single writer had a fight over this one monster that Ben drew, which was a dragon that was like hairy and like this matted fur on it rather than being scaly. But like I made a group chat with all the writers and it was like, hey guys, who wants each one of these? And like everyone was like, give me the dragon, give me the dragon, give me the dragon. Obviously, eventually,
Give me that fuzzball.
switched and give me that big fuzzball. And eventually, ZXC who got it and wrote White Hair, which I think is the weirdest Best Left Buried adventure we've had yet. But we'll deal with that because hopefully there's a whole other wave of similarly inspired monsters where Ben draws something and I give it to a member of the public to try and turn into a dungeon, and that will come out at some point in the future.
That sounds very cool.
Yeah, that's on the back burner. But yeah, I mean specifically, like collaborating with artists, 100% informs the writing at every process. Like, especially because there's this temptation, especially when working with myth, to send stuff back because it doesn't look how it does in my head, right? Because I've obviously got a very visual brain, and this stuff's been floating around there for a long time. And generally speaking, artists are better at visual creation than most writers, right? So sometimes I go like, now, man, that's what this character looks like now. Awesome, there's examples of that in the sort of manuscript of Inevitable, where like stuff has changed because the artist has done a better job of it than existed in my head.
Yeah,
it happens across the board all the time, and it's the art is like. I mean, honestly, I don't think this is particularly controversial. Most role-playing game books are 100% sold on their art. Like,
yeah,
there's a really strong percentage of the audience that is just going to look at them and read the things. Like, I think I'm personally a play supremacist, right? I think that getting the thing to the table is like the most important act, and I don't really care about what the process for the reader is like like what I want is the idea of successful reading for me is that it's usable. It encourages play, right? It makes them go hot damn, I have to get this to the table, and also allowing and facilitating the process of play once it arrives, right? But also there's an understanding that a lot of people just want to look at pretty pictures, and I'm super on board with that because I'm lucky to work with a bunch of incredible artists, and across the board, the popularity of all my games is. I sometimes feel like my work is only ancillary, right, to the artists that I work with, and they're doing the hard work of doing all the marketing for me and getting people to actually look at the goddamn game. Did I use the word ancillary correctly there? Yeah, providing necessary support to the primary activity or operation of an organisation. Yeah, perfect. Okay.
That makes
You
sense.
can keep that if you want. I don't know. Editing.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's important that listeners know that I fact checked this podcast on the fly.
Totally. I mean, no, I did. No, I googled that. That wasn't. Yeah.
Oh, but I think you knew that was the expectation I'd set as the podcast. Do you have room for 2 more questions?
Sorry?
Do you have room for 2 more questions?
Yeah, totally. Go ahead.
Cool. I was going to say before, the thing you were saying with the Beth Buried Monsters. Are you much of a comic person?
Well, I actually really bounce off comics as a medium. I wish I was, but I struggle with skim reading at the best of times, which is why I've fallen out with reading large quantities of fiction, to be honest. I have to read a comic like 2 or 3 times before I actually understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But I love them, and I love art in comics, and I've been lucky enough recently to be involved as the producer and project manager of Die, the RPG. So that's been a lot of reading and referencing the Die comics, and I've fallen increasingly in love with that medium as I go, and I've ended up picking up a bunch of Kieran and Stephanie's other stuff and sort of people in adjacent things. I went to Thought Bubble recently, which is an amazing UK comics convention in Harrogate that I was lucky to go to. Well, peddling die basically. So yeah, I mean, and there's lots of like I think that I don't know how many comics Ben reads, but I can definitely see lots of influences in kind of like black and white comic, particularly. I
That
mean,
makes
I see a lot
sense.
of Junji Ito in Ben's work.
Yeah.
Weirdly, I don't know if Ben. I mean, that's one that friends have said to me that is the case, and I've read some of that and gone, okay, this is a bit too weird. Why am I reading right to left? My brain isn't working here. But yeah,
Yeah, I feel if you
really,
struggle with comics as a medium, trying to
yeah,
flip.
it's not a good place to work. To be honest, yeah.
But yeah,
But
comics I
yeah,
brought up because it just what you were saying really reminded me of how a lot of like Silver Age Marvel comics were written was actually like the art would be drawn first, placed in panels, and then the writer was often crafting the story around that into bubbles
yeah.
and things.
I mean, God, that's definitely a lot. That sounds a lot more difficult than what I'm trying to do, which is like just make a cool monster exist somewhere.
I
Yeah,
it
God.
it baffles me. The idea of doing it baffles me, but I know it was very very popular.
Yeah, God,
Um,
wow.
Going back to Inevitable, doomed Arthurian Western, picking up on one of those words, I guess I wanted to ask what does sort of Arthurian mean to you, and I guess what things have informed your idea of King Arthur and his assorted ilk.
Yeah, I mean it's super interesting. So like I would be the first person to say is that I'm not a Mallory stan. Like I'm not I do not speak enough Middle English to like I've got a copy. I've attempted to read the Mort d'Arthur or whatever, but my interest in it is mostly. I think I'm more interested in the shorthand of what Arthurian literature is meant to represent, which is like and yeah, it's a very non-academic understanding of it, but sort of the idea of this group of knights paralyzed by the concept of virtue and what it means. And particularly the thing that speaks to me a lot about it is this tradition of, for starters, just Merlin running around and fucking shit up is just my entire jam. Like, all of the wizards in Inevitable are just different Merlins doing different stuff. There's like there's three wizards in the Inevitable canon who are basically different like types of Merlin. There's
Merlin
like a
as agenda.
Merlin is yeah. There's a sort of trickster Merlin who's kind of like who's called the Raven Claimed. There is a sort of weird Lady in the Lake husband trapped in a tree dude called the Branch Pierced, and then there's
He cut
also
my heart out.
he cut your heart out, yeah. And then there's also a sort of advisor to the king who is completely just who's interested in completely different things to everyone else at court, right? And but importantly, the thing that I wanted to take from it is the idea of this paralyzing ineptitude of trying to do your job while also be virtueful, be virtuistic and chivalrous, and also the idea of like this obsession with these like quixotic, impossible quests, and essentially what I wanted to hit with Inevitable is the idea of this sort of incredibly horny, but like closetedly, like closetedly horny disaster polycule of cowboys running around trying to save the world, knowing that nothing they were doing was going to matter, and just like
Yeah.
that being the mood that permeates this court is that of just rampant depression and people dealing with that depression in whatever ways they know how, either struggling or giving up or like flailing against it by attempting to do impossible quests or just becoming incredibly violent and not doing a good job of running court. But like ultimately it's a shorthand for a genre that I wanted to hit of these guys doing their best but being like very much beyond their depth, and knowing that it is almost impossible to do what they're trying to do while still maintaining their social cast, while also interacting with this ridiculous level of ambient magic that's running around the setting, from wizards and witches and lake ladies and cups that bear the blood of Jesus and magic swords that get to decide who is king, and cauldrons that if you chop a man's head off and put it in there, it brings them back to life. Like all of this, like nonsense inherent in the trappings of the genre, and also the sort of the weird historical hypocrisy of the fact that it's meant to be like 600, 700 AD, but they are all actually knights, is sort of the same thing that happens in myth, where they're running around in this castle that is, it's meant to be the 1300s, but they're all actually cowboys and they have handguns. Like,
Yeah.
this sort of the time displacement of them not being the right protagonist in their current age is a sort of super weird thing, because obviously the actual Saxon warlords did not give a monkeys about chivalry, right? But what you have is these knights who are obsessed with that being transplanted into this sort of fake period of history, so it's all actually quite anachronistic, right? If you look at your Arthurian media, it doesn't really make it, like, tonally it's wish-wash, because it's applying Christian values that these guys might not have even had, right?
I'm always more interested in Arthurian media that just accepts it as not a real historical setting in any way, while still doing the genre, and just goes for
that's what we can do here. There's sort of like weird cowboys floating about, and it doesn't really make much sense, but that's something that hits to me as well. And then, yeah, like I said, also the just ridiculous ambient magic running around in the setting that nobody really questions how mad it is. Like, you know, there's some weird stuff that happens in Arthur, man. Like, you know, and then, but that also, like, I only sort of reached Arthurian as a word as a shorthand for fantasy, right? Because it's a fantasy western, and the Dark Tower is similarly interested in like this sort of weird anachronism of the fact that these guys are knights and also cowboys, and vice versa sometimes, you know. And that's not really interested in virtue, because like Roland is so far removed from Gilead that honor doesn't matter to him anymore. He just wants to. He seeks the tower. That's what he does. But it kind of. I only sort of started once I started writing the game. I was like, wait a minute, there's a court here. All this fantasy is happening, and all these wizards are running around. Actually, yeah, this is 100% Arthurian. Like, I've only started using Arthurian in marketing in the last like 2-3 months, because like I didn't realize it was something that was so important to the genre, and it's an exciting space to operate in. Basically, I think.
Yeah, it's a very powerful vibe that I think is used really well in the game, and I think feels so much more precise than fantasy. I think it conveys a lot more about the game. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, one last question I wanted to ask. So, music is a big part of Orbital Blues. Has it been a sort of conscious or unconscious part of your process with other projects?
Yeah. So, yeah, the music of Orbital Blues is like a real big part of what it is. Obviously, it's inspired really heavily by sort of like 60s through 80s Dust Bowl Americana, and a lot of sort of country, rock, blues, folk built into there, and like that is the real driving force of what Sam brings to the setting. That's Sam's kind of music. You're sort of like your Springsteen, your Cashes, and your Dylans. That's not something I'm super duper invested in myself. My Orbital Blues sounds a lot more like jazz. If you like the sound of Orbital Blues, or you've played the game, if you come to our Discord server, there is a playlist entirely about music. There's a channel where I talk about all the sort of stuff that appears in my Orbital Blues, and then Josh has his own secret Orbital Blues playlist you can probably find somewhere. Is all the music that Josh played while illustrating and writing his book, which is called Wayward Stars, which is the Orbital Blues art book. Where we kind of talk about how the art is made, because it's really exciting. But so for me, I am a huge. Most of my creative work is informed by um, a lot of like experimental and both classical and experimental jazz, right? So the soundtrack to Inevitable is an album, a series of albums by Colin Stetson, which is called uh, New History Warfare, which is a concept album about the apocalypse and the follow up to it that is played by one man on a saxophone, just ruining the thing. It's like circular breathing and like percussive keys and like it's absolutely mad. And I would encourage anybody who listens to it to try listen to some Colin Stetson. I would start with um, there's a YouTube video called Among the Seth and in Mirrors of this guy playing a saxophone in a sewer under Paris. So it's exactly the kind of pretentious bullshit that I'm on board with. But it's a lot of like, I'm listening to as I'm making this stuff, a lot of weird and experimental jazz, like dark jazz and doom jazz are two things. And like, I think those are quite close to dungeon jazz as well. So it's like super interesting because I listen to I do listen to like inverted commas normal person music, right? I enjoy uh, lots of like indie pop and indie rock, and have dabbled in many genres over the years. But like my creative music is driven entirely by my love of pretentious jazz music, and so the soundtrack to Inevitable is one man dying into a saxophone, and I cannot overstate how ridiculous that is. And my hope for many years has been to commission him to eventually make a soundtrack for the game, but that would cost like in enormous quantity of money, so it's not going to happen because he does film music for actual films that are released in cinemas. So I can't afford that, but it's been in my head for a long time, and like there's lots of other like quite instrumental pieces of jazz that are very inevitable for me. There's a album called Dance of the Whales, I think, by a guy called Gaspar Lieto, which again is like insane horn music. That is, I'll send you a link and you can put it in the doodly doo.
Yes.
But like there's all this like my creative stuff is all entirely weird music, and then also like a lot of film soundtracks that are capable of manufacturing sadness in my brain, because like the mood of this setting is so deeply specific that I kind of like getting myself in the mood when it's like method writing, which is fucking batshit, and I can't believe I'm pretentious enough to suggest that's what I do on a podcast in public. But
if it makes you feel better about suggesting it, I will say I also do a similar thing in terms of often like chasing a mood using music.
I've been listening to that Lady Hawk album that you wrote. I wrote your what's it called? Infinite Dance Floor.
Oh yeah, the Infinite Dance Floor is like written to be played alongside a Lady Hawk album,
which is absolutely on brand. And yeah, but there's a lot of music in a lot of what we do, and when I eventually write my own Orbital Blues adventure, because I've not managed to get around to it yet because we're focusing on other stuff. But I've got one that I'm reasonably excited about. I'm hoping to at some point write a noir investigation adventure set on a cruise ship, and write a cruise ship in space, obviously, because we're not cowards. I'll do that eventually, and that will have a quite heavy jazz soundtrack, I imagine. But you can listen to my Orbital Blues jazz playlist on the which is like 4.5 hours of largely instrumental sad jazz. Well, no, it's all instrumental. There's not a word on it. I made sure.
There'll be no words in here.
No words in here. You should be able to express how sad you are with a saxophone. No, it's lots of like Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk and Bill Evans and Cannonball Adderley, and like lots of that's like more trad classical 50s 60s 70s jazz. John Coltrane and stuff like that. Like lots of weird and beautiful stuff. But I'm always like trying to work. Like I think that originally there was, when I was writing my novel, I wasn't as jazz pilled at that time, and there was like a sort of traditional soundtrack that was mostly like dark country stuff, but it's all kind of like subsided to weird music that's
All shall be unto jazz.
All shall be unto jazz. And people often I've had this joke that there's been a joke going around for a while that all my games are about depressed, and all my games are about how bad capitalism is, and all of my games are and people have said that it's Sad Cowboys. It's the next game isn't Sad Cowboys. I'll tell you about the next one off stream because I'm not announcing that yet. It's not going to be out for like 3 years. But they are all about jazz. So it's jazz, sadness, capitalism being bad, and often ruminating about death. I just
the triangle you could use to summon you.
Yeah. I try to, and I can't remember whose words this are. I've definitely stolen from someone. I try to be always on brand, but never predictable.
Those are good words. I'll probably steal them from you, continuing the chain.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, I think that's that one.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast. And I have not yet figured out a sign-off, so maybe I'll try a different one each episode. So today, trust no one, forgive nothing, see you all in hell.
Trust no one. That's so unnecessary.
Too much.
Thank you for having me. I'll see you. Too much.
Hey there, Kayla here, just letting you know that if you go to soulmuppet.co.uk and sign up to the mailing list, you can imminently receive the adorable, tiny, inevitable quick start, which is on a single sheet of A4 folded into a little zinni. I believe it then goes on general sale around the sort of week of the 13th of March, perhaps. And then the inevitable Kickstarter is coming in April, so just some firm dates for you to lock those into your calendar. And in terms of other things that happened since we did the original recording of this podcast, I can say that I've since released a little introductory adventure for a game of my own called Wild Duelist, a contemplative medieval action game of animal folk warriors travelling to duel. So I've set up a little adventure for that called The Ballad of the Bastard and the Tinkerer, which you can find along with all of my other links at ratwave.uk. Have a good one, and I'll see you on the next episode of This Is Your Life Path.